On certain winter nights, the snow does not seem to fall from the sky. It seems to rise from the road, brushing upward past the windows, whitening the stones beneath the eaves, and making the whole world beyond the door feel as though it has been folded away beneath a clean woolen cloth. Such a night had settled around the tavern. No cart had passed since afternoon. The stable boy had barred the outer gate. The last bowls had been cleared from the tables, and even the old sign above the door had stopped creaking because the snow had gathered thickly around its iron hinge. Within, however, there was broth still warm in the pot, and a low, steady fire on the hearth. Boots steamed by the wall. Gloves rested beside cups. Those who had arrived before the road vanished had no wish to test it again until morning. One traveler, while hanging his coat near the fire, noticed that a narrow strip of red wool had come loose from the lining. It was faded, almost brown at the edges, and it had been sewn in with 3 different colors of thread. "A strange thing to hide inside a grey coat," he said. The storyteller, who had been turning a little wooden cup between his hands, looked across the room and smiled. "It was not always hidden," he said. "Once, cloth like that marked a road where no stone could be seen. That strip may have belonged to a curtain, a merchant's banner, a wedding mantle, or the sleeve of a coat offered freely on a very cold night. By now, no one could say. But I know where such pieces were first sewn together, and why travelers of the northern pass still carry a little red thread in their winter clothes. Needlegate was not large enough to appear on every map. From a distance, it seemed no more than a dozen roofs gathered beneath a cliff, with 1 squat bell tower, 2 storehouses, a smithy, a chapel, and a long stable built against the wind. Yet nearly everyone who crossed the grey glass pass knew the village. Carters stopped there to tighten wheels. Pilgrims bought mittens there. Merchants checked their ropes and counted their pack animals twice. In spring, the streets smelled of wet earth and horse leather. In summer, dust clung to the doorways. By late autumn, every house had bundles of kindling beneath its eaves and jars of dried beans arranged in cool cupboards. At the highest end of the main street stood a narrow shop with blue shutters. A painted wooden needle hung above the door, turning whenever the wind came down from the pass. The shop belonged to Mara Venn. Mara could tell a traveler's habits by the damage to a coat. A worn right cuff often belonged to someone who carried a staff. Small tears at both shoulders came from pack straps. A shiny patch at the back of a woolen cloak showed where its owner leaned against a saddle. She could tell whether boots had walked on bog roads, limestone tracks, or frozen ground by the dirt pressed into their seams. Such knowledge had come to her slowly, through years of looking closely at ordinary things. She was not an old woman, though the white strand at her left temple made strangers think she might be. She wore her dark hair tied back with plain cord and kept her needles in a piece of felt rolled tightly enough to fit inside her sleeve. Her hands were rarely still. Even while listening, she might smooth a hem, wind a length of thread, or test the strength of a button between finger and thumb. That year, as the first frost silvered the water troughs, Mara was working on something no traveler had worn before. It lay across the cutting table beneath the broad front window, a mantle of deep green wool lined with soft cream cloth and bordered with a long band of winter red. It was meant for her younger sister, Lena, who lived in the valley of Bellwether on the southern side of the mountains and was to be married there on the first market day after midwinter. The mantle was not rich by the standards of courts or great cities. There was no gold thread, no pearl clasp, and no fur at the collar. But Mara had chosen the wool herself from a flock raised below the western ridge. She had dyed the outer cloth in a kettle behind her shop, stirring it with ash wood until the color deepened to the shade of pine branches after rain. Along the cream lining, she was sewing a pattern of small leaves, one for every year she and Lena had lived beneath the same roof. Some leaves were neat. Others leaned or curled because childhood had not been neat and Mara had no wish to pretend otherwise. At the bottom corner, she had left room for one final shape, an open doorway. Mina Pell, her apprentice, noticed the empty space each time she carried folded cloth past the table. "Will the door be blue?" Mina asked one morning. "Perhaps. I know I am delivering the mantle." She had also written that the town needed another seamstress. There were weavers there, dyers, and 2 shops that made gentlemen's coats, but no one who mended common traveling clothes with Mara's patience. Bellwether stood in a broad valley where snow lay lightly, and the southern road remained open most of the year. Its market had stone arcades. Its houses faced orchards instead of cliffs. Lena's letters spoke of warm bread, a room above a cooper's workshop, and windows that looked east toward sunrise. Mara had placed each letter in the same wooden box beneath her bed. She had lived all her 32 years in Needlegate. Her mother had kept the shop before her, and her grandmother before that. Yet tradition alone did not hold her there. It was something less visible and therefore harder to cut free. The belief that if she left, the village might lose a kind of care no one else had noticed it needed. Travelers always tore their clothes. Children always outgrew winter coats. The chapel curtains always frayed where the sun reached them. Even the bell rope needed a new leather guard each year. These were small things, but Mara had built her life among them. To leave felt like setting down a garment halfway through a seam and trusting that someone else would understand the pattern. Mina might, in time. That was one reason Mara had taken her as an apprentice. Another was that Mina's father, the village baker, could not keep his youngest child from cutting every discarded flour sack into shapes. By the age of 11, Mina had made dolls, satchels, window covers, and a most unsuccessful pair of shoes. Mara had recognized in her not skill exactly, but attention. Skill could be taught. Attention was a rarer gift. 3 weeks before the pass was expected to close for winter, the new road warden came to collect the village's final repair orders. Thomas Rell was broad-shouldered, red-cheeked, and careful with his words. He had served 6 years on lower roads before being appointed keeper of Greyglass Pass. Needlegate had not yet decided whether he was too young for the position or merely younger than the old warden, who had retired at 70 and still walked to the smithy every morning to offer advice nobody had requested. Thomas brought 2 heavy cloaks, a canvas tool bag, and a bundle of faded red strips. "The cloaks need new ties," he said. "The bag needs a stronger bottom. The strips can be used for patches. Each one has the distance to the next shelter cut into it." Her grandmother had sometimes returned from the pass with bundles of wet red cloth across her shoulders. Her mother had kept similar strips in a chest behind the shop. When Mara was a child, she had been told not to cut them, even when they seemed too worn for use. But she could not recall anyone explaining why. "No," she admitted. "Not clearly." To his credit, Thomas laughed. Mara did not. She folded the old strips and placed them beneath the counter instead of among the patching cloth. The carved posts became a subject of conversation throughout Needlegate. The innkeeper liked them because travelers would know exactly how far remained to the next shelter. The smith disliked them because Thomas had ordered iron caps from a workshop in Bellwether rather than from him. Orrin Say, who had led pack trains across Greyglass for 4 decades, walked up to inspect the nearest 3 and returned saying only that oak was honest wood, though honesty did not always prevent a fool from standing in the wrong place. No one asked him whether the fool was Thomas or the post. Orrin was a narrow man with a gray beard that divided into 2 points when the wind caught it. He knew every bend in the summer road and claimed to know half the winter road, which was more knowledge than he credited to anyone else. The winter route did not follow the summer track. It crossed wind-swept shelves where snow rarely gathered, passed through a cleft known as the Needle's Eye, and descended by a chain of low stone shelters. In clear weather, the journey from Needlegate to Bellwether took 2 days. In snow, it might take 3, before or not happen at all. The closing of the pass was marked each year by a bell. When the road warden judged that the upper way could no longer be kept, he rang the tower bell at sunset, 3 slow notes, repeated twice. After that, no caravan was permitted to depart until the spring inspection. There were still 3 weeks before the usual ringing when the weather changed. The morning began strangely warm. Water dripped from the stable roof, and the mountain peaks vanished behind a smooth gray ceiling of cloud. Dogs slept badly. Birds gathered in the lower thorn trees. By noon, a wind came from the south and rattled shutters all along the street. Oren stepped into Mara's shop without knocking. "How much red cloth do you have?" he asked. Mara looked toward the bundle beneath the counter. Why? They carried baskets of cloth from the storeroom, brought in wood, covered the dye pots, and helped the baker stretch canvas between his rear door and the shed. Travelers hurried toward the inn. Stable hands shouted names and counted animals. Thomas rode to the tower and rang the closing bell, while daylight still lingered behind the clouds. 3 slow notes crossed the village, then 3 more. The sound seemed smaller than usual, pressed down by the snow. At dusk, Oren and 2 stable hands returned from the lower marker with ice in their beards. They had found no one on the road, but the drifts were already deep enough to hide the stone walls beside it. Thomas ordered every upper door barred and sent men to check the village houses. Mara lit 2 lamps in the shop. 6 travelers who could not find beds at the inn slept among the bolts of cloth, wrapped in spare blankets. A merchant from the coast took the cutting table. An old couple rested beneath it, on folded sailcloth. Mina sat near the stove, mending a child's mitten by firelight, while Mara finished the last secure seam on Lena's mantle. For a time, the little room felt safe enough that the storm could be mistaken for weather happening somewhere else. Then the stable bell began to ring. It was not the pass bell. It was a sharp handbell used when a horse broke loose or a lantern fell in straw. Mara opened the door. Snow drove into the shop at once, rolling across the floor. A stable hand stood in the street, holding the bridle of a gray mule. The animal's sides were crusted white. One pack hung open, and a stirrup leather dragged from the saddle. "It came down alone," the stable hand called. Thomas appeared from the inn, pulling on his gloves. Oren followed, bareheaded. They led the mule beneath the awning of the stable and examined its harness. There was no blood, and the animal did not limp. Its packs contained flour, lamp oil, dried apples, and a bundle of letters wrapped in waxed cloth. "Caldus's mule," Oren said, "from the high-fold shelter." He had kept the high-fold shelter for 9 winters, providing hot water, straw beds, and plain soup to anyone caught above the needle's eye. Thomas checked the letters. These were meant for bellwether. He must have sent the mule down before the snow thickened. Thomas looked toward the road, where the night had become a moving wall. No search could begin in that darkness. Even Oren agreed. They fed and rubbed down the mule, then searched its packs for anything that might tell them who had been traveling with Caldus. At the bottom of the left pack, Mara found a coat. It was heavy mountain wool, brown with a green cast, and torn from shoulder to waist. Snow had worked into the lining. A wooden toggle was missing, and one pocket contained 3 walnuts, a bent copper pin, and a smooth black pebble. The coat was too narrow for Caldus, and too long for a child. "Do you know it?" Thomas asked. Oren shook his head. "Let me dry it," Mara said. "There may be a maker's mark." By then the travelers had woken. They watched from their blankets as she pressed towels against the soaked wool. Mina fetched a bowl for the melting snow. The outer tear was clean enough to repair, but the lining had pulled loose in several places. Mara turned it back, searching for initials. There were none. Instead, she found lines of stitching beneath the arm, so faded they were almost the color of the cloth. They did not follow the seams of the coat. Some ran straight, others curved, crossed, or ended in little square knots. Near the hem, 3 white stitches surrounded a blue one. Mina leaned close. That is not decoration. They had been sewn at different times, with different thread. Some were tiny and regular. Others were broad enough to have been made by a hand stiff with age. A red path crossed the back, vanished beneath a patch, then appeared again near the collar. The merchant on the cutting table sat up. A map? A map belonged on parchment, with rivers painted blue and towns marked by towers. But when she spread the coat flat, the red stitching bent twice around a shape like an uneven tooth. She knew that shape. Every child in Needlegate knew it. It was the outline of the split rock above the first mile of the winter road. Mara touched the 3 white stitches around the blue one. In her memory, she saw her grandmother's hands tying 3 knots in a length of faded wool. She saw a chest behind the shop. She saw strips of red cloth hung beside the door to dry. "Mina," she said, "bring me the bundle Thomas left." On the coat, beyond the split rock, 2 small crosses were followed by 4 stitches like teeth. Oren came nearer. He had removed his wet coat, and snow still shone in his beard. "2 bends before the broken stair," he said. Thomas stared at the lining. The winter road. Oren named ridges and turns. Thomas compared the stitches with a survey he kept in the road office. Mina noticed that every square knot lay near a shelter or storage place, though some were not shown on Thomas's map. Mara examined the thread itself. The oldest had been spun by hand. The newest looked less than 20 years old. "Whose coat is it?" Thomas asked. No one knew. "And why carry a road inside it?" "The first posts are gone," he said. "Broken?" asked Mina. "Buried. There is a square here, below the split rock. No shelter stands there now." If the stitched mark proved accurate, they might learn what the other symbols meant without going far enough to risk the upper slopes. Mara surprised herself by volunteering to go. Thomas objected first. Oren objected second, more quietly. Mara listened to both, and then pointed out that neither of them could distinguish a tied running stitch from a line of couching, while the coat contained both. "If this was made by seamstresses," she said, "you will need one." Mina stood in the shop doorway, holding the coat and reading the stitched sequence aloud, one final time. "Split stone, 2 bends, 4 teeth, square knot." He moved across the slope by listening, as he put it, to the firmness beneath his staff. They found the split rock with only its black upper edge visible. Beyond it, the first bend had vanished beneath a drift. The second had become a narrow shelf of hard snow. At the place marked by 4 teeth, Oren stopped and scraped with his staff. Stone appeared beneath the snow, 4 broken steps. The square knot lay 30 paces farther, where the slope looked empty. Thomas began to dig. The others joined him. After a quarter hour, the shovel struck wood. They cleared a low door buried nearly to its lintel. Behind it stood a single stone chamber, built into the mountain under the remains of the old weighing house. The air within smelled of dust, pitch, and dry grain. Shelves held 2 sealed jars of beans, bundles of kindling, 3 lamps, a coil of rope, and folded wool blankets wrapped in oilcloth. Everything was old, but carefully protected. On the inner wall, someone had painted a red line with 3 branches. Mara held up the coat. The same branches were sewn beside the square knot. Oren opened one jar, examined the beans, and closed it again. Still sound. Different hands filled it. Dates ran back nearly 80 years. There were notes about snow depth, broken roof tiles, spoiled oats, and cloth needed before the next hard frost. At the top of several pages appeared the same 2 words, "Winter Seamkeepers." Mara read them aloud. Oren removed one glove and touched the page with a bent finger. "My mother used that name. She found her grandmother, Ven. Beneath it was her mother, Ada. Beside both names, a small mark had been drawn, a needle inside an open square. For a moment, the cold room seemed to tilt around her. Her grandmother had died when Mara was 12. Her mother had died 7 winters later, after an illness that kept her from the mountain during her final year. Both had taught Mara to sew. Neither had told her she was meant to inherit anything beyond the shop. Or perhaps they had told her in pieces while winding wool or drying red markers, and she had been too young to understand that ordinary work could hold a name. She closed the ledger gently. "We take the book," she said. "The needles and thread as well. Leave the supplies for anyone who needs them." On the journey down, the snowfall thinned. Needlegate appeared below them, dark roofs in a white hollow. Mara could see the blue shutters of her shop and Mina's small figure waiting between them. She also saw riders gathering outside the road office. News had arrived from the lower watch station. A southbound pack train had passed before the storm carrying 5 travelers and a driver. They had been expected at Needlegate the previous afternoon. They had never arrived. If they had reached High Fold, Brother Caldus would be sheltering 8 people, perhaps more, with whatever food and fuel remained there. If they had not reached it, the stitched road inside the old coat might be the only record of where they had gone. The travelers in Mara's shop were moved to the chapel so that the cutting tables could be used. By midday, the road office had become too crowded for useful thought, and Thomas brought his maps to Mara instead. Oren came with the ledger from the weighing house. The baker sent hot barley broth. The innkeeper sent a loaf, 3 candles, and an apology that he could spare no one to carry them. Mina spread the old coat on the largest table. Thomas placed his official survey beside it. The contrast was almost comical. His map showed a clean black road crossing a pale brown mountain with measured distances written in careful script. The coat showed lines that wandered, doubled back, changed color, and sometimes ended beneath patches made from entirely different cloth. "The survey is easier to read," Thomas said. "The survey has never been wet," replied Oren. Mara opened the seamkeeper's ledger. Much of it concerned simple maintenance. Replace the lamp at Split Rock. Move the oats from Lower Fold before mice find them. Ask the warden for 2 roof boards and accept 1 because 2 will not be sent. Yet between such entries were descriptions of the markers. Red for the traveled line, blue for water or ice, white for shelter. 2 knots when the road bent out of sight. 4 close knots where the wind crossed from the east. Cloth split into 3 tails, where travelers should leave the broad shelf and descend toward stone. The marks were not uniform. They changed with the year. Mina noticed this first. "Here," she said, pointing to 2 entries written 6 winters apart. Ven says 3 knots after the black ledge. Later she says to remove the middle knot. The markers were instructions. "Stitched down in only a few places," she explained. "It can move without coming free." But it was not complete. A large patch covered the upper center of the lining, precisely where the road should have crossed the most dangerous part of the pass. Mara unpicked one corner. Beneath it were cut ends, not hidden stitches. Someone had removed a section before adding the patch. "Why cut a map apart?" Mina asked. "Perhaps to update it," said Thomas. "Or to keep part of it somewhere else," Oren said. They searched the coat thoroughly. In the lower edge of the right sleeve, Mara found letters so small she needed a lamp to read them. E.S. No one in Needlegate knew those initials. The merchant whose train was missing was called Herod Bentz. His driver was Pell Arn. The registered travelers were a widow named Nessa Vale, a potter called Jory Tan, a mother and son from the coast, and a young clerk traveling to Bellwether. None had the initials E.S. The coat might have belonged to someone already staying at High Fold, or it might have been left there years before. Thomas wanted to set out at once. Oren refused. "We know the lower mile. he said. Beyond the broken stair, the storm will have laid snow across the eastern shelf. By afternoon, the wind will rise again. If we go now, we may add ourselves to the count. We do not reach 8 people by losing 5. They pushed them through the drift until they reached firm ground, then threaded red cloth between them. Where the road crossed open snow, they added strips high enough to flutter. Where the wind was dangerous, they kept the line low so a traveler could grasp it. The village smith could make the pegs. Cloth was the greater difficulty. Mara measured the old strips Thomas had removed. End to end, they reached less than 200 paces. Some tore when pulled. She examined her shelves: gray wool, brown canvas, blue linen, undyed cloth, and small pieces of bright fabric saved for cuffs and children's caps. Against snow, red was best. Dark blue could serve. Black would be visible in daylight, but vanish early in the evening. Take the red border from the mantle, Mina said. Mara looked toward Lena's gift. The band ran around the entire garment, 4 fingers wide, dyed with madder and a little costly cochineal brought from southern traders. It was the brightest cloth in the shop. Cut into strips, it would mark hundreds of paces. No, Mara said. Mina lowered her eyes. I only thought other cloth might be found. The first expedition would go only to Lower Fold. Yet when she lifted the mantle from the table, its red border seemed brighter than it had before. All afternoon, Needlegate prepared. The smith heated and hammered narrow pegs. Mina and 3 older children cut damaged root cloth into usable lengths. Mara joined the pieces with flat seams that would not catch in gloved hands. Thomas inspected snowshoes, lamps, and ropes. Oren chose 6 people for the journey and dismissed twice that number who volunteered. The village reeve made a list of every person, animal, blanket, loaf, candle, and coil of cord leaving the village. He had once lost a sack of salt because no one wrote down which cart carried it, and had treated lists as a form of moral protection ever since. Near sunset, the clouds lifted enough to reveal the lower ridge. The wind combed loose snow from its crest in a white plume. Oren watched for a long while. We leave at first light, he said. If the plume turns north, we return. If the peaks disappear, we return. If the line sings, we kneel until it stops. Her mother had never spoken of being a seamkeeper. Mara remembered her repairing mittens for road workers without charge and leaving bundles outside the shop before dawn. She remembered lengths of cloth soaking in the wash tub, smelling of snow, smoke, and horses. Once, when Mara was perhaps 7, she had woken to find Ada sewing a bright line through the lining of a stranger's coat. "Why put pretty thread where no one can see?" Mara had asked. Her mother had smiled without looking up. "So it will be there when seeing is difficult." Her mother had been more concerned with teaching her how to judge thread, settle accounts, and avoid buying cloth in poor light. Perhaps she had expected another winter in which to explain. Perhaps she believed Oren or the old warden would continue the custom. Or perhaps the seamkeepers had already dwindled into memory, their knowledge scattered among people who each held only one small piece. The thought did not comfort Mara. It made the room feel full of unfinished conversations. Before dawn, she rose and opened the wooden box beneath her bed. Lena's letters lay tied with green cord. Mara read the most recent one again. "Come before the market snow," Lena had written. "There is room here. You need not decide forever. A door can be opened without tearing it from its hinges." Mara folded the letter and returned it to the box. At sunrise, the rescue party gathered. Oren led. Thomas carried the official road rope. 2 stable hands pulled the sled with food and fuel. The smith's eldest daughter, Bria, carried the pegs she had helped make. Mara carried the joined cloth line coiled across her shoulder. Mina stood before her with a small pouch. Bone needles, waxed thread, awl, scissors, 2 thimbles, she said, "and the brass one from the weighing house." Mara threaded the cloth through its eye and tied 2 knots before the first hidden bend. At once, the road felt different, not safer exactly, but connected. Behind them, the red strip led back toward Needlegate. Ahead, unmarked snow stretched upward. They passed the broken steps and crossed a slope where the drift reached Thomas's waist. The carved oak post stood beneath it, invisible until his shovel struck the iron cap. He cleared the top, stared at it, and then left it exposed as a support for the cloth line. "An honest post in the wrong place," Oren said. Thomas brushed snow from his sleeve. "You have waited since autumn to say that. I simply did not know it would be about a post." But the recent storm had come from the south, and the familiar pattern had reversed. Snow piled along the lower edge, while patches of dark grass showed above. Oren tested both directions. The upper line was firmer. "The coat marks the road below," Thomas said. "The coat marks an older winter," Mara replied. They shifted uphill and set the cloth where they walked. At each peg, Mara made a small change in the knots to describe the ground. 1 knot for steady footing, 2 before a bend, 4 where the wind crossed hard. She had learned the system less than a day before, yet her hands found a logic in it. Sewing had always been a way of placing thought where another person could feel it later. At noon, they reached Lower Fold. The shelter was half dug into the slope, with a stone roof and a door opening away from the prevailing wind. Snow sealed one shutter, but had not entered. Inside were 2 bunks, a clay stove, a water jar, and enough wood for 1 night. Someone had recently used it. Ash lay in the stove. A heel of bread rested on the table, hard but not moldy. Beneath one bunk, Thomas found a child's knitted cap. The missing coastal mother was traveling with a boy of 9. "They reached here," he said. Oren examined the ash. "Yesterday morning, perhaps, before the worst snow." Tracks had disappeared, but a length of twine was caught beneath a stone near the shelter wall. Farther east, Mara found a scrap of yellow yarn frozen into the snow. The child's cap had yellow stripes. The scrap lay away from both the old route and their new line. Oren studied the slope. There used to be a shepherd's hut beyond that rise, or maybe in Bellwether by now, and it did not blow far. See how it is twisted around this grass. It was pulled from knitted work when someone brushed past. Snow. There looked smooth, but Oren's staff sank nearly to its handle. They circled uphill, following scattered stems of grass. Another thread appeared, then a piece of torn leather caught on thorn. At the top of the rise, they saw the shepherd's hut. Its roof had partly collapsed. Snow covered the lower walls. A faint line of smoke lifted from a hole between the stones. Thomas called out. The door moved from within, but could not open against the drift. They dug quickly. Inside were 3 people, Nessa Vale, the widow, Tavi and Elian Moore, the mother and child from the coast. They had left Lower Fold believing they were descending toward Needlegate. When the whiteout hid the slope, they followed what they thought was a roadside wall and instead crossed east. Nessa knew of the shepherd's hut from a journey years before and had led them to it. They had 1 blanket, a tinderbox, and 3 candles. The roof leaked snow, but the remaining rafters held. The child, Tavi, wore 1 yellow-striped cap and carried the other in his pocket. My grandmother made 2, he explained. She says ears should be treated equally. The rescuers wrapped them in blankets and led them back to Lower Fold. By then the wind had sharpened. The cloth line trembled against its pegs. Near the open shelf, it began to hum. Oren raised 1 hand. Everyone knelt. The sound deepened from a hum to a thin, steady note. Snow moved around them in ribbons. Mara held the line with both gloves and felt the wind traveling through every knot she had tied. The cloth did more than show the way. It told them when standing upright, would make them unsteady. It gave the scattered group one shared thing to hold. When the note softened, they continued. They reached Needlegate after dark. The village bell rang once as they entered the lower street, and people emerged with lanterns. Tavi's mother wept quietly into the baker's shoulder. Nessa insisted on walking without help until she saw the inn door, at which point she sat on the step and refused to move until someone brought her hot cider. 3 missing travelers were safe. But the merchant, his driver, the potter, and the clerk remained unaccounted for. Brother Caldus was still at High Fold, if he had not left it. The first journey had shown that the old stitched route could guide them toward shelters. It had also shown that following it without question could lead them into dangerous ground. That evening, Mara set the old coat beside the seamkeeper's ledger and noticed that snowmelt had darkened a section near the collar. Under the damp cloth, a line of pale green thread became visible. It ran not along the route, but away from it, ending at the edge of the missing patch. Mina bent close. Was it there before? More green stitches appeared. They formed words, though the letters were small and crowded. Not where the road lies, but where the snow leaves it. Below the sentence was a name. Elsa Say. Oren read it twice. Then he sat down on the stool nearest the stove. "My mother," he said. The coat had belonged to Elsa, who had died 18 years before. She had been a seamkeeper beside Selaven and Ada. Oren had known that his mother repaired root cloth. He had not known she carried the whole winter way, sewn inside her coat. "Caldus keeps a chest of unclaimed garments at High Fold," he said. "She left that coat there in her last winter. It became too heavy for her shoulders, and she wore a shorter one home. She meant to collect it in spring. No one could answer." Perhaps Caldus had found it while preparing the shelter. Perhaps he had put it into the pack as extra covering. Perhaps, recognizing the weather, he had known exactly what he was sending down. Mara studied the hidden sentence. Not where the road lies, but where the snow leaves it. The stitches on the coat did not preserve a fixed track. They recorded absences, places where wind scoured stone bare, where a roof made a hollow, where a ridge divided a drift. The road was not the line drawn across the mountain. It was the ground the winter allowed people to use. The missing patch mattered less than they had believed. Even if the coat had been whole, the upper route from 18 years ago could not command the present snow. Mara opened the ledger and turned to the final pages. Her grandmother's last entry ended halfway through a sentence. Later notes were in Ada's hand. Then came several blank leaves. On the first blank page, lightly written in charcoal, were words Mara had overlooked because they seemed like a stain. "Do not copy the line. Continue it." There was no signature. Mara sat with her mother's brass thimble in her palm and understood why no complete set of instructions had been left in the shop. The seamkeepers had never inherited a finished answer. Each winter they walked, watched, altered, and returned. Their knowledge survived because it changed. All her life, Mara had believed care meant keeping things from changing. She repaired a cuff so it resembled the day it was made. She saved scraps because they might restore a torn corner without anyone noticing. She had worked on Lena's mantle as if a perfect garment could carry their shared past safely into the future. But a repaired thing was never truly unchanged. It held new thread, a new hand, a new decision about what should remain and what should be cut away. Thomas stood across the table, waiting. "Can we reach High Fold?" he asked. Mara looked at the maps, the coat, and the small pile of remaining red cloth. "Not by copying this," she said. "We must make a line for the mountain as it is now. That is how my mother spoke. Every red and dark blue piece in the village," she said, and then more. Thomas stood at the front and explained what had happened to his posts. He did not blame the unusual storm, the old warden, or the people who had removed the cloth. He said simply that he had mistaken permanence for reliability. Then Mara showed them the coat. She explained the knots, the hidden stores, and the line they needed to make. She asked for cloth that could be seen against snow. Red first, then blue, black, green, or any deep color. It did not need to be fine. It needed to hold when wet and accept a strong seam. For several breaths, no one moved. Then Nessa Vale walked to the front and placed her burgundy shawl on the table. "This kept 3 of us warm for one night," she said. "Let it keep someone else warm by showing the way." A merchant contributed a bolt of dark green wool, then tried to calculate its value aloud until every person in the chapel looked at him, and he decided generosity was best practiced without arithmetic. Children brought scarves. Stable hands brought worn saddle blankets. The chapel keeper removed 2 faded hangings from a storage chest. Even the retired road warden arrived with a bundle of root cloth he had kept because, as he said, he distrusted the speed with which useful things became rubbish. Mina and the village women sorted everything by strength. Some pieces could be made into a continuous line. Others would become flags. Cloth too soft or rotten was returned. The reeve recorded each gift, though Mara told him the pieces would never come back in the same form. "Everything comes back in some form," he replied. "The list helps us recognize it." The upper shelf required long handlines because the wind could erase every visible trace within moments. The needle's eye needed flags on both sides. They also had to keep spare cloth for repairs and the return journey. Mara stood alone in her shop after the others had carried the donated fabric to the meeting hall. Lena's mantle lay folded on the shelf. She took it down and placed it on the cutting table. In a quiet room, scissors can sound very loud. Mara fitted the blades beneath the first stitches of the red border. Her hand stopped. She pictured Lena entering the bellwether chapel, wrapped in green and winter red. She pictured the open doorway she had not yet sewn into the lining. She pictured herself standing beside her sister after years of missed feast days and letters delayed by weather. The mantle was not merely cloth. It held 6 months of work, but also the future Mara had allowed herself to imagine. Mina entered without speaking. She stood on the other side of the table. "If I cut it," Mara said, "I cannot make it as it was." Lena may be angry. She unpicked the corners, preserved every usable length, and cut narrow bands along the grain so they would not twist in the wind. Mina rolled each strip and tied it with white thread. When they finished, the green mantle remained on the table, plain at the edges and unfinished. The red wool filled 2 baskets. Mara touched the empty corner of the lining where the doorway had been meant to go. "Bring these to the hall," she said. "Tell them the line is long enough." People who had never sewn more than a button learned to wax thread, hold a hem, and pass lengths of cloth without tangling them. The baker proved surprisingly good at making evenly spaced knots. Thomas was terrible at threading needles, but excellent at winding finished line onto wooden spools. Oren sat near the stove, cutting leather guards for the pegs. Mara organized the work into sections. Red lines for dangerous crossings, blue and white flags for shelters, green markers for alternate ground. Each length began with a stitched symbol showing where it belonged. Mina copied the symbols onto scraps so every table could follow them. As the hours passed, the donated cloth lost its former shapes. The inn curtains became long red bands. The festival loaf divided into a dozen blue flags, each carrying part of a white curve. Nessa's shawl formed the first handline for the upper shelf. The merchant's wool became reinforcement at every join. People recognized pieces as they worked. "That was the sleeve I wore when my eldest was born," one woman said. "This patch came from the old South stable," said another. "That blue belonged to my father's market coat. You should not have removed them." Every official who inspected the road called them disorderly. "Will you teach me?" It was the kind of morning that made a mountain appear harmless. Oren looked at the bright peaks and said, "We should leave before it remembers otherwise." Mara wore the coils of finished cloth across both shoulders, cushioned with folded wool so they would not cut into her neck. Bria came with a hammer. 2 stable hands, Wren and Column, pulled the supply sled. The 7th traveler was Nessa Vale. No one had invited her. She appeared at Split Rock, wearing a borrowed coat and carrying a stout walking stick. When Thomas told her to return, she said that she had crossed Greyglass more often than he had held a warden's key. When Oren told her the upper shelf was no place for pride, she said pride had nothing to do with it, then pointed out that High Fold might contain frightened people who needed someone not busy with ropes and shovels. Mara asked whether she was strong enough after the night in the shepherd's hut. "No," Nessa said, "but I am rested, which is often more useful." She stays behind me and ahead of the sled. Red bands rose and fell over the white slope. At the open shelf, Nessa's former shawl ran low between pegs. Mara gripped it and remembered the thin note it had sung the day before. Now the air was still. Frost coated the knots, giving each one a clear white edge. Thomas stopped at every buried post and tied the cloth to its iron cap. The oak remained useful after all, once it became part of something larger than itself. At Lower Fold, they found a message from Needlegate tucked behind the clay water jar. Mina and a young runner had followed the safe line at dawn, bringing fresh bread and written weather observations from the tower. Mina's note was concise. South cloud lifting, wind light from west. Tavi says the yellow caps are both warm. Do not forget green means alternate ground. Beneath this, she had added, in smaller letters, "I repaired the green mantle edge, so it will not fray." Mara folded the message inside her glove. From Lower Fold, the known winter route climbed north toward a row of black rocks called the 7 Chairs. Only 4 were visible above the snow. The coat showed 2 possible lines. Red stitching passed below them, while green loops wandered above. "Not where the road lies," Oren said, "where the snow leaves it." Mara placed a green flag at the branch and tied 3 tails into its end, following the seamkeeper's old sign for leaving the broad shelf. Bria drove pegs at intervals. Thomas measured distance by counting his paces and cut marks into the exposed heads. Behind them, a second road took shape, not beneath their boots, but at the height of their hands. Travel grew slower as the ground steepened. At times, Oren stopped for several minutes without explanation. He looked at ridges, touched snow, and watched the flags. Mara began to understand that his pauses were not uncertainty. They were work. She had made similar pauses over cloth. Before cutting an expensive piece, she might stand with one hand upon it, considering grain, stretch, and the way a shoulder would move. A customer watching might believe nothing was happening. Yet the stillness prevented errors. No clever stitching could later hide. At the 7 Chairs, they found the first remains of the pack train, a broken crate, half buried near a rock. Inside, straw protected 6 clay cups, all unbroken. Jory Tan, the missing potter, had marked each cup with a small pressed star. The track beyond divided. One branch climbed toward the needle's eye. The other descended into a hollow where snow lay blue in shadow. Oren pointed to dents along the upper edge. Pack animals passed here before the storm. The snow filled their tracks, but the weight hardened what lies beneath. "Toward High Fold," said Mara. At midday, thin cloud crossed the sun. The mountain lost its shadows, and distance became difficult to judge. What appeared to be a short rise took half an hour to climb. A dark mark that resembled a nearby stone proved to be a cliff a mile away. The colored line behind them became the only measure that felt honest. A red flag was a red flag, whether near or far. Knots passed through Mara's gloves, one at a time. The simple scale of human hands restored order to the immense white slopes. They ate standing beneath an overhang. Bread froze at the edges before they finished it. Nessa poured a small measure of hot broth from a wrapped jug into each cup. Caldus will have rationed his wood, she said. He will put everyone in one room, seal the other chimney, and cook only twice a day. That sounds like him. It was not a true opening in stone, as Mara had imagined from the name. Two cliffs narrowed around a tilted pillar, leaving a passage just wide enough for a laden cart in summer. In winter, wind poured through it with such force that travelers tied themselves to a fixed chain along the wall. The chain had disappeared beneath clear ice. Thomas chipped at it with the edge of his shovel. Oren walked 20 paces west, then returned. "We can climb around the pillar," he said. "The north side has a ledge." Briar drove pegs into cracks between stones, and Mara threaded a continuous red hand line along the cliff. The border of Lena's mantle began there. Its color shone against gray rock and blue shadow. Mara knew each section by the faint crease left from the old hem. She could identify the corner that had once rested near the mantle's clasp, and the long strip cut from its lower edge. Seeing it stretched across the ledge did not feel like seeing the gift destroyed. It felt like watching one purpose open into another. Halfway around the pillar, the cloth caught on a sharp stone. A few red fibers pulled loose. Mara stopped the group, took out her pouch, and repaired the place while kneeling in the snow. She used the brass thimble from the hidden store. It fit poorly, being made for a broader finger, yet its worn rim guided the needle firmly through the thick wool. Thomas waited beside her. "Does a road often need sewing while one stands on it?" High Fold stood less than 2 miles ahead, but between them stretched a long basin where wind had piled snow into pale waves. The coat's missing section would have covered this ground. They searched for signs of the pack train. Near the basin edge, Colm found a length of rope. Farther on, a black patch showed through the snow, a saddle blanket. The travelers had crossed there. Oren tested the basin and withdrew his staff. The hole remained open, its walls soft and blue. "Too deep," he said. "There may be streams beneath. The western line adds almost a mile. It curved from trunk to trunk, and each turn required a choice about which tree would remain visible in new snow." As they worked, the light faded. High cloud thickened. Oren urged them forward, but no one hurried. Every peg and knot had to guide the return as well as the outward journey. At the far end of the basin, they found a mule harness hanging from a low branch. One strap had been cut cleanly. "They freed the animals," Thomas said. "Better than letting them pull men into the drift," Oren replied. 2 sets of hoofprints had been preserved beneath the trees. One led north toward High Fold, the other curved downhill and vanished. The gray mule that reached Needlegate had probably followed the second. Mara imagined Caldus, or the pack driver, loading it with food, letters, and Elsa Say's coat before slapping its flank toward the north road. A practical message sent without paper. Someone was alive above, and they needed the village to know. The party climbed out of the basin as twilight gathered. Ahead, a dark roof appeared against a wall of snow. Then a chimney. Then a blue and white flag tied beneath it, barely moving. High Fold. Thomas called. No answer came. They approached the door and found it blocked from the outside by a drift. Bria and Wren began digging. A moment later, the door shook from within. Someone was digging on the other side. When the opening was wide enough, Brother Caldus crawled through on his hands and knees. He was a round-faced man with one eyebrow burned shorter than the other. His gray robe was covered by a patched leather apron. He looked at the 7 rescuers, the colored line descending behind them, and the supply sled. "You took your time," he said. Then he sat down in the snow and began to laugh. The sound brought others to the door. Harrod Bence, the merchant, emerged first, followed by his driver, Pell Arn. Jory Tan came on a crutch made from firewood. The young clerk, whose name was Avon Lowe, carried a lamp. All 4 missing travelers were alive. Nessa took command exactly as she had predicted. She did not ask whether anyone had been afraid. She told Harrod to help unload flour, gave Avon the task of heating water, ordered Pell to check the sled harness, and sat Jory near the stove with his injured ankle raised on folded blankets. Caldus closed the outer door and led the rescuers inside. High Fold was larger than Lower Fold, with a main room, 2 sleeping chambers, a wood store, and a narrow stable. Yet after the storm, it felt small. Blankets covered the shutters. Snow had pushed beneath the rear door. A pot of thin oat soup hung over the stove. In the woodroom remained only 6 split logs and a basket of twigs. "We burned the broken furniture first," Caldus said. "Then Harrod's second-best account chest. Your best account chest was firewood with brass corners. When the snow thickened, they mistook an old livestock track for the upper route." By the time they understood, returning downhill was harder than continuing toward the Needle's Eye. Pell knew a route through the pass from summer journeys and led them toward High Fold. They reached the shelter after nightfall. Jory had twisted his ankle, and one mule had fallen into a drift, though it was later freed. Caldus sent the strongest animal toward Needlegate the next morning, packing it with letters and whatever might keep it visible and warm. "Why Elsa's coat?" Oren asked. Caldus blinked. Was that Elsa's? People remember garments after they forget wooden spoons, and spoons after they forget unpaid lodging. He looked at Mara. The coat was thick and already torn. I thought the mule might need covering if it wandered. I also put dried apples in the pack, which were probably more persuasive. Elsa once told me it held more road than I could walk in a year. I thought she was making fun of my knees. "Which means you never saw it again," Mara said. "Exactly. You understand storage." It was a list of observations. From the last winter, her mother had walked the upper pass. Western Basin, shallower after dry autumn. Fur-line sound. Ice at the eye forming early. Red cloth needed at upper ledge. Elsa's coat left for pattern. At the bottom, Ada had written, "Mara asks why we sew what no one sees. Tell her when she is older that unseen work is not wasted work." Mara read the line once. Then she folded the paper and placed it in the inner pocket of her dress. She did not weep. Grief did not always arrive as tears. Sometimes it was the sudden warmth of hearing, a familiar thought in words never spoken aloud. Her mother had remembered the question. She had intended an answer. 18 years had passed, and still the answer had found its way to Mara through a coat, a mule, and a shelter nearly lost beneath snow. Outside, the colored road ended at High Fold's door. Inside, people ate broth made richer with beans and dried onions from Needlegate. Jory's ankle was wrapped. Damp socks hung above the stove. For the first time since the storm, every missing traveler had been found. Yet they were not home. The weather decided the next part. Oren had hoped to rest one night and return north at dawn, but the western wind strengthened after sunset. Snow struck the shelter from behind, sealing their new footprints and loading the eastern slope above the basin. Their line would remain visible, but the ground beside it might not remain safe. They could hear the wind in the chimney. Each gust pressed smoke into the room. Caldus opened and closed a small vent to keep the stove drawing. "The southern descent may be clearer," Thomas said over the table. His survey showed Bellwether less than 5 miles away beyond the crest. "Wind is crossing from the west. The far valley will be sheltered," before his ankles swelled to the size of a cabbage. Every letter in the box beneath her bed seemed to pull gently toward that valley. Thomas read the weather notes. Caldus kept near the door. "If the wind turns north tomorrow, the Bellwether Road will open before ours." Mara looked at the shelter's occupants. Nessa was tired despite her straight back. Jory could barely put his boot on. Avon had never crossed snow before this journey. Caldis would not abandon Highfold unless ordered, though his fuel was nearly gone. The southern descent might indeed be easier. It might also change beyond the crest, where no one in the room could see it. The line to Needlegate had taken an entire village to make. Along it stood stocked shelters, known ground, and people waiting for their return. Bellwether was where Mara wanted to go. Needlegate was where everyone could be led. She unfolded the green mantle. It was no longer a wedding gift fit for a chapel. Without its border, the outer edge showed lines of fresh stitching Mina had added to prevent fraying, yet it remained warm. Mara placed it around Jory's shoulders. "We return by the road we made," she said. "Not tomorrow if the slope is wrong, not quickly because we are tired, but together when Oren judges it safe." Nessa asked him whether his account chest had included a written qualification as road warden. He admitted it had not. Thomas folded the survey. We returned to Needlegate. Caldis showed Wren and Colum which roof boards could be burned if they needed another night. Mara sat at the long table repairing gloves. Avon brought her a cup of hot water scented with the last slice of dried apple. "Did you truly make the road from a wedding mantle?" he asked. "Part of it. Useful things can be untidy. But now I think she also missed learning what had changed. A road becomes only memory when you stop walking it. It can remain yours while you are away, if those within know you mean to return." They woke to a silence so complete that the ticking of cooling stove irons seemed loud. Oren climbed onto the roof through the chimney platform and remained there until sunrise. When he came down, frost covered his beard. "The upper basin has shifted," he said. "The eastern slope shed snow in the night. Our western line should stand, but the last traverse into the Needle's Eye may be loaded. We leave after the sun touches it, no earlier." Harrod finally allowed his fine outer coat to be cut beneath the arms so he could move freely. When sunlight reached the high ledge, the flags outside lifted together. The road was ready to be read again. They departed Highfold in a line of 12. Oren went first. Behind him walked Thomas and Bria with shovels and spare pegs. Jory lay on the supply sled, wrapped in the green mantle, while Wren and Colum managed the ropes. Nessa walked beside him. Harrod, Pell, Avon, and Caldis carried packs. Mara moved near the middle where she could see both ends of the group. Before closing the shelter, Caldis placed 2 dry logs, a jar of beans, and a bundle of candles beneath the table. "For the next person," he said. "You may be the next person," Thomas told him. "Then I shall be pleased by my own foresight." On the eastern side of the basin, a broad fan of fallen snow lay beneath the slope, pale and innocent in the morning light. Had they followed the most direct route from the old survey, they would have crossed its path. The western line remained. Green strips led among the trees. Frost stiffened them, but each knot was firm. Harrod touched one blue section as he passed. "That was my wool," he said. "It still is," Mara replied. "It has simply traveled without you." Thomas marked his survey, no longer drawing a confident single line. He added notes about wind, depth, and the date. At the southern edge of the firs, the green markers turned toward the Needle's Eye. There the party stopped. The final stretch of their line had vanished, not all of it. The nearest peg remained, bent almost flat. Beyond it, only 2 short red ends rose from the snow. A slide from the upper slope had crossed during the night, carrying cloth and pegs downhill. It was smaller than the fall on the eastern basin, yet large enough to erase 200 paces of marked ground. Oren crouched at the edge. "The snow has settled, but I do not trust what rests above it." To their left, broken ground descended among exposed stones before climbing toward the safe ledge they had used. Thomas examined the slope. "We could set a new line across the slide. The shelter could hold them, but its fuel would not last many nights." More snow was expected within 2 days. Jory needed rest and a healer. The safer ledge lay visible beyond the broken ground, less than half a mile away. Mara watched the remaining flags. The last green strip near the firs moved gently west. A red flag beyond the slide, still attached to a tree, pulled sharply east. Wind was meeting in the open ground. Between the two, at the base of a row of stones, several dry grass heads stood almost still. She thought of the loose stitches inside Elsa's coat, not where the road lies, but where the snow leaves it. "The air divides there," she said, pointing to the stones. "The grass is sheltered." He walked 20 paces on rope, tested the snow, and returned. "There is a narrow lee behind the rocks," he said. "Firm enough for one person. The sled will need guiding from both ends." Short pieces remained, blue from the baker's banner, black from a stable blanket, red from the mantle, burgundy from Nessa's shawl. "We join them here," she said. There was no table, and the cold made fine work difficult. Mara sat on the folded edge of the sled beside Jory. Bria held cloth across her knees. Nessa shielded the thread from the wind. Mara overlapped each piece broadly and sewed through 4 layers with waxed cord. Her fingers stiffened. The brass thimble slipped twice. When the cord knotted, Avon warmed it between his palms until it loosened. One by one, the fragments became a single mismatched line. Thomas and Oren fixed its far end behind the row of stones. Bria anchored the near end to a fir root. The group crossed in pairs, keeping low. Pell and Wren steadied the sled from the front, while Colum held it from behind. Jory watched the upper slope and gave unhelpful advice concerning every bump. "Potters prefer level roads," he said. "Pots prefer shelves," Nessa told him. "Men must accept the ground they are given." They reached the safe ledge without incident. The quiet success seemed almost too small for the labor that had prepared it. No cheer rose, no bell sounded. They simply gathered on firm stone, counted 12 people, and continued. At the needle's eye, the red handline from Lena's mantle remained tied along the cliff. Its repaired section held. Jory's sled could not pass the narrowest turn, so they helped him stand between Thomas and Pell, while Bria and the stable hands carried the empty frame around the pillar. Jory gritted his teeth, but did not complain until he was seated again. "I was promised a road," he said. "This appears to be a wall with a ribbon. In that case, it is very well made." 12 people filled it beyond comfort, yet no one wished to continue in fading light. Caldus lit the stove. Nessa organized sleeping places. Herod and Pell stretched a canvas across one corner to stop a draft. Mara hung wet gloves above the heat and inspected the line through the window until darkness hid it. They ate the last of the flat cakes. Avon passed around one of Jory's rescued cups. Each person drank a little warm water, then handed it on. When it reached Mara, she saw the pressed star in its base. "Why stars?" she asked Jory. "Because people look into an empty cup and think only of what is missing," he said. "A mark at the bottom gives them something else to find. Rich customers enjoy paying more for things that grow at their feet while ignoring what is above them." In the morning, the sky was gray, but clear enough for travel. The final miles descended through gentler ground. At the buried weighing house, Caldus replenished his candle bag and left a note in the seamkeeper's ledger describing everyone found at High Fold. Oren added the date, wind direction, and the position of the new western line. Thomas signed beneath them. He passed the pen to Mara. For a moment, she looked at the list of names: Sella Ven, Elsa Say, Ada Ven, and others whose families still lived in Needlegate. Then she wrote her own, Mara Ven, line remade after the southern storm. 12 returned by the western firs. She gave the pen to Bria, who signed as the maker of the iron pegs. Then to Thomas, who added Mina Pell beneath the description of the marker system, although Mina was waiting below. "She will object that you wrote her name for her," Mara said. Then she may walk up and correct my handwriting. Mina stood first in the line. She counted the returning travelers aloud as they approached. At 12, she began again to make certain. Tavi and his mother waited beside her, both yellow caps pulled over the boy's ears. The village bell rang once, paused, then rang again. This time, people did cheer, though not loudly enough to startle the mountain. They took packs, supported Jory, embraced relatives, and led the cold party down the final street. The baker had made onion pies. The innkeeper had heated every room. Someone gave Caldus a cup of cider before he could request water and modestly refuse anything better. Mina reached for the empty cloth coils on Mara's shoulders. "You used all of it?" Instead, she felt something quieter. She had come back because the road led safely here. That did not make every other door close. For the rest of that winter, the colored line remained across Greyglass Pass. The road was not opened to ordinary caravans. The bell had declared it closed, and Thomas kept it so. But on clear days, small teams traveled to Lower Fold and the weighing house store. Twice they continued as far as High Fold with wood and food. Each journey corrected the route. A buried peg was moved. A flag was raised. A section near the 7 chairs changed from red to green after the wind carved a safer shelf above it. Thomas created a new road ledger. On the first page, he drew 2 columns. The left was titled, "What Stands?" It listed posts, walls, shelters, chains, and bridges. The right was titled, "What Changes?" It listed snow, wind, water, cloth, supplies, and judgment. Mina added a 3rd column when he was not looking. Who knows? Under it, she wrote the names of guides, stable hands, shepherds, seamstresses, shelter keepers, and anyone else whose knowledge might otherwise disappear between official pages. Thomas kept the 3rd column. Mara taught 6 people to make and read the markers. Not all were women, and not all could sew well. That did not matter. Breya understood anchors. Oren read wind. Nessa remembered shelter stores. Caldus knew which supplies people used first when frightened. Mina could look at a confusing system and remove everything it did not need. The name Seamkeeper remained, not because only seamstresses held the duty, but because seams were what joined different pieces without pretending they had always been one cloth. In the shop, Mara finished winter commissions. She repaired Herod's cut coat and charged him fairly, which he claimed was more alarming than the mountain. She reinforced both of Tavi's yellow caps with red thread. She made a padded boot for Jory's ankle so he could work while it healed. Lena's green mantle hung near the cutting table. Mara wrote her sister a long letter. She described the storm, the missing travelers, the coat, and the seamkeepers. She explained exactly what she had done with the red border. Then, because truth should not be trimmed to make the writer appear kinder, she admitted that she had refused to cut it at first. She sent the letter south with a road official traveling by the Lower Valley route. No answer could return before the pass reopened. The planned wedding day came and went. Mara thought of Lena from dawn until evening. She imagined a chapel in Bellwether, green branches above a door, and perhaps another mantle borrowed from a friend. She did not know whether the wedding had happened without her. The uncertainty hurt, but it was a clean hurt. There was no action she had failed to take that day. The mountain remained closed. That night, she finally embroidered the doorway into the cream lining. She used no single color. One side was blue like the shutters of her shop. The other was gold, like the sunrise Lena had described over Bellwether. Red stitches joined them across the top, uneven but strong. Mina watched from her stool. Which door is it? But a person may carry more than one key. In Needlegate, people removed shutters, mended carts, and opened storehouse doors to count what remained. Thomas delayed the pass inspection until Oren agreed that the upper basin had settled. Then the seamkeepers walked the entire road. They recovered every piece of cloth they could find. Some strips were ruined, others had faded, torn, or stretched. All were washed in large tubs behind Mara's shop and hung from lines across the village. For several days, Needlegate truly did resemble the washing line Thomas had once disliked. He made no complaint. The red border of Lena's mantle returned in fragments. One piece bore rust from an iron peg. Another had a hole where it rubbed against the stone ledge. The section Mara repaired at the Needle's Eye was almost unchanged. Donors came to identify their cloth. The reeve checked his list. Some took their pieces home. Most left a small portion with Mara. For the next line, they said. Nessa reclaimed one corner of her shawl and gave the rest to the seamkeeper's chest. The baker took the portion of his banner, showing half a loaf, declaring that half a loaf was an honest sign after winter. Harrod accepted 3 lengths of green wool, examined their weather stains, and announced that their value had increased because they now possessed history. That is not how value works, Mara told him. It is exactly how value works when a merchant tells the story properly. Mina embroidered tiny knot symbols between them. 1 for steady ground, 2 for a bend, 4 where the wind crossed. The work was not finished when the reopening bell sounded. It rang on a bright morning, 6 weeks after midwinter. 1 long note, then 2 short. The first northbound travelers entered Needlegate before noon. Pack animals filled the stable yard. Children ran beside carts. Familiar dust began to show through the wet streets. Near sunset, 2 riders came down from Split Rock. Mara recognized Lena before she saw her face. Her sister had always leaned slightly forward in a saddle, as though arriving were an activity that could be hurried by will alone. Beside her rode Dane Arlo, the bellwether cooper she intended to marry. Mara stood outside the shop, holding a length of red thread. Lena dismounted. She was smaller than Mara remembered, and older around the eyes. For one uneasy moment, neither sister spoke. Then Lena took off one glove and touched the white strand at Mara's temple. "You have been adding winter without me," she said. "Only a little. I received your letter," she said. Mara waited. It arrived 3 days after the day we had chosen. She had not finished the cakes. "The colors are uneven, and some pieces are worn. I used to think you were trying to prove nothing bad had happened. Finish it as it is." Although Lena had never possessed her sister's patience for fine seams, she could cut a straight band and wind thread without tangling it. They spoke of their mother, the shop, bellwether, and the years in which letters had carried what neither sister said aloud. Mara told Lena she had not decided to leave Needlegate. Lena said, "I did not ask you to leave. I asked you to come." In later years, the pattern could change. Plans, like roads, were allowed to answer the season they entered. The wedding took place on a mild day at the end of spring. Mara crossed Greyglass Pass with Lena and Dane. At the Needle's Eye, she paused beside the stone ledge. The winter handline had been removed, but new iron loops waited for the next snow. A small red thread remained caught in one, too short to recover. It moved gently in the warm wind. Lena wore the mantle in Bellwether's little chapel. The patchwork border drew more attention than gold would have. Those who knew its story touched it only after asking. Those who did not know saw a garment made from many colors and thought it beautiful without explanation. At the bottom corner, the embroidered doorway remained open on both sides. Mara spent that summer in a room above Dane's cooperage. Its eastern window looked over orchards, exactly as Lena had promised. She repaired market coats, made new friends, and learned that southern dust damaged hems differently from mountain stone. In autumn, she returned to Needlegate, carrying cloth, letters, and 2 kinds of thread unavailable in the north. Mina had kept the shop well. Thomas had added shelves to the road office, 1 for maps, 1 for marker cloth, and 1 for sewing supplies. The shelf for humility was not labeled, but Mara observed that it received regular use. For many winters after, the seamkeepers marked Greyglass Pass. They never made the line exactly the same way, twice. Cloth colors changed, routes shifted, new shelters appeared, and one old store finally lost its roof. Each alteration entered the ledger. Each person who knew something useful wrote it down or taught it to another. Travelers began sewing a short piece of marker cloth inside their winter coats. The strip was not a charm, though some treated it as one. It did not promise that snow would spare them. It reminded them that no safe road was made by stones and signs alone. Someone had walked ahead, noticed what changed, and left a line for those who followed. Years later, a child asked Mara whether she had ever regretted cutting Lena's mantle. Mara answered that regret was too simple a word. She regretted the need for it. She regretted the fear on the mountain and the years in which her mother's knowledge had been almost lost. But she did not regret the road the cloth became, nor the garment it became afterward. A good seam does not return the cloth to what it was, she said. It helps the cloth continue. Most cups were empty, and one listener near the wall had fallen asleep with both hands folded beneath his cheek. The loose red strip was faded and rough. At one end, 4 small knots had been tied close together. "For crossing wind," the storyteller said. The traveler turned it between his fingers. Do you think this was truly part of the first line? Greyglass carried many winter lines, and cloth passed from coat to road and road to coat more times than any ledger followed. But it came from someone's offering. That is near enough to the same truth. His stitches were not as even as Mara Ven's might have been, but they held the red strip firmly inside the coat. Outside, the snow no longer rose past the windows. It fell softly now, straight down through the dark, settling over the stable roof and the silent road. By morning, someone would clear a path from the tavern door to the gate. Someone else would lead a horse across it. Wheels and boots would widen it. Before long, it would seem as though the road had always been there. But those beside the fire knew better. A road continues because many hands keep making it. The traveler hung his coat beside the hearth once more. The repaired strip rested unseen within it, ready for whatever weather waited beyond the door. The storyteller set the needle back in its basket. The tavern keeper covered the last embers with ash, and while the snow laid its quiet cloth across the sleeping countryside, every soul beneath that roof remained warm, sheltered, and safely found.